Does everyone know why roses are planted at the end of vine rows? Anyone put your hand up if you know? Yeah? Go on. Yeah?
Because the pests attack roses first.
Yeah.
This way, it's possible to forecast some problem.
That's it. Perfect. What do we call that in our industry? First of all, a round of applause. Very good. Very good. What do we call that in our industry? That's a leading signal, right? The farmers use it to know whether they have a problem with a particular vine row. If the roses are blossoming, then it's fine. If they're not looking good and healthy, then they can intervene. I have no idea what they do. I found this out in Greece when I went with my wife. But then they can use that same roses to understand whether their intervention has been successful, because then they'll start blossoming again. So farmers use the roses to understand how their vines are developing over time, in the same way how we use observability to see how our monoliths, our services, our systems develop over time. So in this talk, you're going to learn some lessons for how to modernize your monolithic systems and the important role the observability plays to make sure that your vines are not dying. Put your hand up if you've ever struggled with a legacy system in the cloud. Put your hand up. Good. Keep it up if the legacy system is a monolith in cloud. Good, okay, right, good. You come to the right talk. I'm happy about that. It's always this one monolith that is a problem, right? Monoliths do make sense, they do, until they don't. Monoliths slow you down. They have multiple teams working on a single code base that causes friction. I couldn't have come to a Datadog conference about observability and monitoring and not display my talk as a flame graph. So the top span is about architecture modernization, so the whole thing is all related. All the sub-spans are related to architecture modernization. The first question is, why are monoliths a problem? You have to start from the problem before you jump to the solution. Then you can say, well, monoliths are fine. You can actually try modularizing the monoliths. But then once you decide that they are a problem, you can start with an experiment and break out of the monolith entirely across all your systems. That's the talk. And I'm Tolly. I'm lead architect at Flipdish. Basically, my job boils down to asking people for a mirror board when they come to me with a problem or a diagram that they've got in their heads. Before Flipdish, I worked for Cinch, which is an online retailer based in the UK. I think we're the fastest growing startup in the UK history. And our highlight was Dr. Werner Vogels was talking about our serverless event-driven architectures at reInvent in their keynote. Now I work for Flipdish, an Irish restaurant tech company, and we sell technology to independent restaurants. Flipdish likes to do things big. So we launched around about 9 years ago in 2016. We've handled over 50 million orders in that time, and we have not one, but 2 monoliths already. And so the decision we had in front of us is, do we lock ourselves into this dance of the 2 monoliths, or do we modernize? But obviously, I'm not here to tell necessarily only the story of Flipdish, but you're here, you don't work for Flipdish, you don't really care. What can you do if you're struggling with the legacy systems in the cloud? That's the main question we're going to try and answer. And I appreciate this is the last talk of the day, and you're expecting a glass of wine or a beer after this. So if you want to switch off, these are the 3 things that you're going to take away, basically. Start somewhere, generalize sensible defaults from that thing that you've learned in the first step, and then keep learning. That's the general gist of it. But if you're interested in the rest of it, please follow along. So the first question is, what's wrong with the monolith? Which is this first part, that first span. So a few things that I can think of. I don't know, you probably can think of a few. There's a few hands that went up earlier. So one, tech can be out of date quite quickly. The infrastructure and the pipelines are all managed centrally with all the DevOps anti-patterns that comes with. You can have a large runtime blast radius. You can have flaky tests, merge conflicts all around, and then ultimately it's really, really difficult to work with. And I've seen these happen, like some of these, subset of these, or all of these in different companies. At Flipdish, we hit them all right on the bullseye. So what was Flipdish's starting point in 2023? So very standard architecture in the sense that we had a back-end monolith, a front-end monolith, and some integrations. And ultimately, and one of the things that's particular about restaurant tech, we have loads of front-end clients like terminals, kiosks, white-label apps, and websites. And then we acquired another company who had almost like the same system, but in a different language. The thing that connected the two systems together is that they were both hosted in Azure, and also they were all kind of monitored and observed by Datadog. So those are the only two things that were sort of connected. And mergers and acquisitions happen all the time, and this is a problem that hopefully you can all relate to. So what's wrong with the system? There's nothing wrong with necessarily that system as is. I did a bit of an experiment, so I overlaid the teams on the systems, and if it looks confusing, it is confusing, it is messed up. So team A and team B share the monolith. Team B and team C share the front-end monolith, and then team D owns the entirety of the other system. So that becomes, Conway's law starts to become reality here and becomes a real problem. And notice how you've got a big platform team in a startup scale-up that owns too much and has to deal with a lot of things. So that's an indication of a system that leads to no self-serve, no autonomy, and no fast flow. But, as I said earlier, you can stick to your monolith, because we did. We tried that. We gave it a go. And how can you do that? One way that you could do that is you can take that same monolith, you can deploy a subset of it as a separate dedicated deployment. And then you can take a different subset of it, and maybe separated by user as an example, and deploy that as a different modular monolith. So then you have consumer API, integrator API, and so on, and that kind of, you can scale that up to a few different things. And that works. That worked really well for us. It helped us actually go from this situation where it was a bit confused to where team A could actually own monolith module A, and team B could own monolith module B. So then we could do that in Datadog as well. So in Datadog, you can have service A, service B owned by team A, and then service C, D, and E owned by team B. And that works. And it helps with managing that system. But unfortunately, some problems cannot be ignored. So I turned to my colleague Adam, who'd been at Flipdish for many years, and I said, hey, Adam, what does our monolith do? Our monolith is called Zeus. And his answer was, it's easier to list things that Zeus isn't. Which I was like, okay, that tells me everything. But I'll give you an idea of what it did, just so you can get a gist of it. The monolith answers phone calls. It shortens URLs. It is a website builder itself. It registers domains. It serves thousands of websites, white label websites. It builds and deploys iOS and Android apps. This is the same monolith, by the way. It also builds QR codes for table ordering. And it processes food orders, which, by the way, is its main purpose. But it does all the other things. Second problem we had is before I joined, there was a time where they had to send loads of more memory to every developer because their laptops couldn't handle the monolith anymore. If that's not an indication, then I don't know what that is. And that has a real side effect, which is as your number of tests grow, both your time to run that test suite grows linearly as well. Same with flaky tests. As your integration tests grow, then your flaky test, the chance of flaky test failing grows linearly as well. So you have this circle of slow to write code, slow to refactor, slow to release. I know there's a lot of debate of whether monoliths can be a thing. You can just make them work better. But there's more than once in my career where I've experienced all these issues, and the tooling just doesn't support this paradigm. The third thing is that our users were impacted. Again, acquisitions are something that happens. It happens everywhere. But we had a monolith number 1, which is online ordering, and monolith number 2, which was the acquired monolith, which is point of sale. And we had an overlap. We had overlapping systems, users, vouchers, and loyalty. So that was really impacting UX, because UX was fragmented. So we couldn't ignore that problem. And again, this is all about Flipdish. But bring it back to the purpose of what I'm talking about here. You can ask yourselves, how is your customer's UX? Is it problematic? Is it overlapping? Is it confused? How's your team's developer experience? If they're really struggling to develop features, then maybe it's related to your monolith. Maybe not. But we actually wrote it down. This is almost verbatim of what we wrote about 1.5 years ago. We said at Flipdish, we diagnosed that our reliance on the monoliths create friction on a large blast radius. The monoliths slow down feature delivery, tightly couple teams, and make it hard to unlock new capabilities without ripple effects. Despite tactical efforts, we remain constrained by their role as source of truth. So we actually had this moment where we said, right, now we can't do with the monoliths anymore. So we searched for ways to reduce friction and blast radius. But rather than go all out and break out of the monolith, and we all do this now, we actually started with an experiment. And this is the third bit of the third span in our architecture modernization. I don't know if you remember, you noticed that one of the overlapping systems was loyalty. And we had a real problem with loyalty. So what the confused AI-generated woman here, restaurants can offer campaigns, like you can get your 5th order free. So you order 3 times online, you order twice over the phone, and then you don't get a free meal. And that's a problem, because we've offered the restaurants the ability to do this. So we thought, okay, right, this is the burn the ships moment. We're not going to try and do this in monolith. We're actually going to choose serverless and domain services to build outside of the monolith. And a quick note about serverless. One of the problems that we had with the monolith is that we had no self-serve, no autonomy, and no fast flow. And I tried to articulate this. I'm a big fan of serverless. I've worked with it for a few years now. And I tried to articulate the different behaviors between a serverful paradigm and a serverless paradigm. In the serverful paradigm, the so-called streamline team, the teams that deliver the features, they'll request infrastructure changes from the platform team. You might have infrastructure code, you might have pull requests, and that works, but you still have to do something centrally. You have to wait for environments, CI pipelines, databases, all that stuff. And you need to manage the app hosting and the runtime concerns. And you have limited visibility into your costs. And then your platform teams maintain central hosting layers, your Azure App Services, your SQL of the world. And they have to manage all the scaling rules and the cloud accounts. And they end up, I've seen this over and over again, responding to alerts and acting on post-instant fixes, because they're sort of the owners of these centralized systems. On the other paradigm, the streamline teams will own the full stack, from infrastructure to app to front end. There's no request for anything. You deploy independently using a language you're familiar with, in TypeScript in this case. You optimize for the problem domain, so they're not worried about various hosting paradigms and things like that. And the cost and the performance are really transparent. And then the platform team can pivot towards providing templates and guardrails and golden paths. They can focus on cross-cutting concerns, and they can guide on alerts. They don't need to own the alerts. So that way, by this choice only, you achieve self-serve and autonomy. In our case, we chose Lambda and Dynamo, and we use SST to help us with provisioning the resources. And back to our problem. So we had 2 systems that were handling these 2 different sort of in-store and online ordering. So our monolith 1 was basically dealing with website and app. Our monolith 2 was dealing with point of sale. And they were both in Azure. And one simple change we made is we started funneling these events, the order created and sale created, into EventBridge, EventBus, which was outside of our cloud provider of choice at that time, and start building loyalty completely outside of the monoliths. Completely different service and event-driven as well. And how do we know that works? We knew because the thing that remained constant in this scenario was Datadog. We could just write maybe 8, 10 lines of code to instrument our code with our serverless code with Datadog, and we get the serverless product out of the box. So what went well in this scenario? So what went well with our experiment? First of all, we had a happy customer. They get a free meal. She's really happy. A bit scary, if you ask me, but she's apparently happy. Tamash, my colleague, he posted this in Slack. He was really happy that for the first time in ages, they were able to develop something in the morning from scratch and then able to show it in the afternoon. And that was something that just wasn't possible before. Another nice side effect is we started decoupling the domains and the systems. So ordering, which is the monolith, and loyalty, which is a new service. Completely different systems, and the sort of concepts didn't intertwine. What would we do differently? So the first thing that you do with the experiment is you pick out a team and you say, hey, can you go and build this? And then one of the things that we had to battle is this FOMO that the other teams had, or the teams that felt left behind dealing with a monolith. That was something that we'd probably have to deal with better. DynamoDB, although we know it was hard, it was part of the serverless tech stack. That's something that we still struggle with. It's a great piece of technology, but it's something that the teams need to learn. It's a steep learning curve for them. And finally, although we had the serverless product and it was quite easy to instrument, Datadog monitors were a bit of an afterthought because everything was moving parts at that point, and that's something we'd do differently. And again, because you don't work for Flipdish, if I had to give some advice around how to run an experiment, as I'd say, start with a clear product problem. So loyalty for us was a clear product problem. It wasn't related to ordering. It was just sort of like a meta system on the back of loyalty, on the back of ordering. And choose tech that runs itself. I'm sort of like photographing serverless here because that's my preference. But when I say tech that runs itself, you try and find something that you don't have to do too much to provision things. And this thing about having two different systems, there was a time where when we were building loyalty, we said, well, let's put order ID into loyalty. But then we said, no, well, let's keep that separate. Let's call it transaction key or something different to not muddle those concepts. So make sure to protect your system from the monolith. Sorry. Yeah, so those are the two things I'd probably advise when you start with the experiment. So we had self-serve, we have autonomy, but what about fast flow? I already talked about DynamoDB and how that could be difficult to start with. So one thing that I definitely advise for when enabling fast flow is to think about your platform while your experiment is ongoing. So loyalty is that span under start with an experiment. And platform is sort of like a parallel span happening. So one thing that we did, and I've done multiple times, is start by holding hands with the teams. Sit with them, pair program with them, learn from what they're learning and what's difficult for them. And then continue by writing down these learnings. Write down what the basics is, what's the access to AWS in this case, and then codify. You don't need to provide everything all at once, but you can actually work together quite closely. And if we look at what we built, and you can take an analogy of this, so you start with docs, but then you can do some governance as code. So we built AWS accounts. We built a service template for spinning up a serverless service. We built the event bus topology. We also built the access control. And all of that was iterative while the team was doing the experiment. And we were sort of anticipating that if it succeeds, then we've got things ready to go. So we have self-serve, autonomy, and fast flow. But for all of you who don't work at Flipdish, I'd say this enabling platform team approach, I'd really, really recommend it. It's super powerful. It really builds empathy, and you get a really good outcome on the back of it. Actually, just today, someone at my team built a AI bot in Slack that queries the Notion docs to say, you ask the question, how do I access AWS? And it answers that this is how you do it, because we'd written those Notion docs about 2 years ago. Second one is, don't overbuild platform, build just enough platform. What do I mean by that? Do things as code, try and get good practice in early. Augment, don't reinvent the framework. So in our case, we used SST because they'd solved loads of problems. We could have just used CDK. And centralize only if you have to. So we were very careful to not centralize too much. It's a very easy thing to sort of reach to the platform team just to centralize things because that's what they're used to. So now we got to the point where the experiment was successful. We know this works. How can we scale the approach to all systems and teams? And this is the bit where we actually break out the monolith properly. You actually have to write down this sort of heuristic. Build everything new on the golden path. This is what we did, and this is how we would start building outside of the monolith. It's easier said than done, but you do have to say it. Has anyone watched this film, Inside Out? Put your hand up. good. Great, a few people. So I look at developers like this. So you have one developer who's quite angry with TypeScript because they don't understand types, and they're like, this is a terrible, terrible language. And then you have those developers that are disgusted with JavaScript. I don't understand why these front-end engineers love JavaScript so much. And then you have the front-end engineers who are terrified by C#. Like, it's a beautiful language, but they don't understand it. And then finally, you've got your intern or your junior who's like, oh, God, how do I learn all of this stuff? That's terrible. And of course, you've got your toxic positivity tech lead, engineering manager, CTO, engineering director in the middle who says, let's choose one and let's smash this. This is amazing. That's basically every organization I work for. I don't know if this relates. And then, as a result, what you get is like, you get one team going one direction saying containers and Python are the future. And then you've got the other team saying, hey, we can do this with monoliths. Never mind this complexity of service, we can do this with monoliths. And you get the third team saying, we believe in serverless, we should go that direction. None of these teams are going in the same direction, and that's a problem. As an experiment, I overlaid the languages that we had on the systems that I showed you earlier, and we have a bunch of JavaScript, some TypeScript, some Swift and Kotlin, and C#. And then if you move some of the JavaScript, which is not a big pivot, to TypeScript, then this is how it starts looking like. And then you've extracted some things out of the monolith, and then C# becomes a lot less important. And then what you have achieved is that you've got 5 languages going almost to 2. So you've got some standardization, and the organization can be a bit more viable going forward. So we chose TypeScript, AWS, and Lambda, Datadog as our monitoring observability platform, and Amazon EventBridge as our sort of eventing system across services. But how can you break out of the monolith? And this is the critical, I guess, learning point, is that has worked for us so far, and architecture modernization is an ongoing journey. But again, every sort of monolithic system I've seen starts with a monolith, then puts a message on some sort of bus, because at some point they want to do some async stuff, which is a good practice. And then they have another part of the monolith responding to that bus. And that was confirmed because our acquired company did exactly the same thing in a different language and a different framework. And then when we acquired that company, then the 2 monoliths started doing loads of sync calls between the 2. And this is what I refer to when I say the dance of the 2 monoliths. That heavy coupling between the monoliths, and that blast radius is enormous. So we had to have that decision of modernization. So it boiled down to these 3 things. Use events to break out of your monoliths. Think about how you're going to see the historical data, assuming that your new services will want to host that data locally. There's loads of different patterns that you don't need to choose that one, but if you do choose that one, then you need the historical data. And then you need to consider, as your modernization is iterative, you need to keep the monoliths in sync. So you need to go the other way. So just step by step on this one. The most important step is to get that message, that envelope, into some kind of bus. We put it in a global event bus in EventBridge, and then the monolith could respond to that event, and all of a sudden we've got an event-driven system between the 2 systems rather than having those synchronous calls and that dance. And then as a nice side effect, we've got the new services that we're building on the back of these messages, as that same message can be used to build new systems. But the most important bit is that bit. Get your events out of your monolith. There's some gotchas here that you need to probably careful about. You know, there's people talking about translating some of these events, but honestly, just start by putting something out there so you can get going. What about the historical data? So normally you'd kind of have this event flow. At some point, you have to do this one-time seed of data, and then continue with that normal event flow. Obviously, that new service needs to care about idempotency a little bit and make sure that you're not processing sort of duplicate messages or messages twice. However, you know, in the serverless paradigm, a lot of these things are actually something that you do anyway. My colleague James came out with a nice pattern where you'd, rather than put the event straight away in the queue, and then because the queue can sort of hold that message for about 2 weeks, then while you're doing that, you can have that one-time seed of data and then continue that event flow from then on. So there are patterns for seeding your service from the monolith to get like that historical data. In every company I've worked for, and we've done it at Flipdish as well, we've had various ways of doing it. You may want to standardize this, but it's something that I found people use the API layer, the database layer, use sort of synthetic events. There's loads of different ways to do this. But it's something that you have to consider. And finally, keeping the monolith in sync. So we've talked about going from the monolith to domain services, which is kind of, that's our direction of travel. But you have to consider the domain services to monoliths as well. So the way we solved that, at least, is that we had a queue per service. So we would route the events to a queue, and then the monolith became aware of those queues, and then they would kind of respond to events asynchronously. And that works for us. It keeps the monolith in sync to kind of keep some APIs in sync and things like that, and that really, really helps. There's a big gotcha in this statement, because you can be smaller than you think. And I'm guilty of this as well. I've said this question as well. Can't we just add this extra thing to the monolith one last time? There's people laughing here, which is, it happens all the time. I've done it, but you have to break from the old. You have to find opportunities to build outside the monolith. There's no, you can keep adding to the monolith, but at some point you have to have that discipline. An example for us, and one thing that I actually didn't list in the list earlier of what the monolith does, it prints receipts. Well, it creates receipts off orders. So we built that, again, with this event-driven way. And my colleague Paddy and his team built it, and they kind of deleted the code from the monolith by creating a receipt service in AWS. And he knew, again, having Datadog as an ally there to know what the traffic profile is, you can then say, well, once all the traffic is gone and kind of migrated to the new system, we can delete that code from the monolith. Okay, so what worked well in this situation? With the loyalty situation, the first experiment that we did, we let that sit for a while, and then when all clients migrated, we actually deleted code. I've mentioned delete code a few times. You have to be disciplined to delete code from the monolith, because otherwise you end up with duplicate systems and you end up with situations you don't want to be in. This is a graph my colleague Mark came up with, which is, I think, is brilliant. It really highlights the story. So as the number of features grow, the time to ship a change grows exponentially as well with the monolith. But then when you move to the service approach, those graphs are all distributed and they're smaller. So the time to ship change actually remains quite small. And that's one of the nice side effects that you get from going to services. Another nice analogy is the bulkheads. So the teams have their own AWS accounts. They have isolated observability, isolated costs, isolated code, all that stuff. They've all got ownership, and they don't leak in to each other's systems, apart from linked with events. EventBridge did liberate our monolith domain events, so that's definitely something that I would recommend if you want to get out of your monolith. We achieved self-serve, we achieved autonomy, we achieved fast flow. But as hopefully we all know, like I'm not here to say I've found the silver bullet, go and do this tomorrow. Every architectural decision, every software engineering approach has its trade-offs, and the new approach has new sets of problems. Problem number one, where are the boundaries of my service? What's the granularity of my service? I need to start thinking about all these things. Then I need to start testing in a very different paradigm, which is something that we're not used to. And then, very topical, we need to monitor distributed event-driven services. I think Datadog are improving in this space, but it's harder than just doing it and just observing a monolith. It's not as easy. And I think in the previous talk there was mention of that the traces can get crazy, like absolutely crazy. So for that reason, you have to invest in learning. We did loads of AWS immersion days. We did loads of Friday learning days that we do. And we did loads of big picture event storming with everyone across the business. You need to invest in learning. And that's a nice side effect, in my opinion. You start thinking about the domain. You start thinking about the business, whereas before you just pile things into a monolith. One thing that I keep, I like to reflect a lot, and I have a little bit of anxiety for what decision has led to what. So I kind of, if I went back to myself a couple of years ago, would I say I regret to tell you that your decision to do X has failed miserably, or your strategy Y has caused us problems A, B, and C, respectfully, slightly older Tolly? What are those things? And again, I was chatting to one of my colleagues, Mark, and he said these three things, which really I could really relate to. We started with the experiment, and we said, right, if we do this, then we'll generalize this. But we didn't actually make that explicit. We didn't get people excited that we're looking to modernize our systems. So we didn't really anchor the problems. We didn't get people excited, and I think that's something that we'd probably do better. We changed a lot all at once. So we moved cloud provider, we moved architectural paradigm, we moved hosting paradigm, infrastructure as code, like loads of things were moving. Datadog remained the same, and that's it. Maybe I would move fewer parts, or be a bit more lenient with a golden path. And finally, okay, so quick question here. Hopefully everyone's not asleep by this point. So put your hand up if you're in a platform team, just out of interest. Keep your hand up if you've got a product manager in your platform team. 1, 2, 3, about a handful of people. Okay, great. Lovely, I'd like to speak to you because I've never had a product manager. I don't know how it feels. But there is a thing with platform teams that they don't really know how to build products because they're not, that's not what they do. They're usually infrastructure people, SRE people. And including myself, I'm not good at doing products, but I'm learning. But I think a more product-focused platform team is something that I would do differently. So these are the 3 things that I would probably tell my past self, and we're probably not a very good online ordering and in-store restaurant tech company if we don't give you takeaways. So what should you do? Because you don't work for Flipdish, obviously. I don't know what stage you are in this journey, if at all. But I'll try and give you one tip from our experience, at least, and from previous companies, of what I would do in each stage. If you're wondering whether your monolith is a problem, just look at your developer experience, your user experience, and see if those 2 are correlated. If you think that right now you can just optimize your monolith, that might be the right decision for you right now. Just do it. That's fine. There's no judgment here. I'm not saying that you should definitely get out of your monolith. But if you have decided that the monolith is a problem, and tomorrow you're going to go back to work, maybe not tomorrow, you need to rest a little bit, but Monday, you go back to work and say, hey, like I think we need to start. Then start with an experiment, but then when you do that, start building your platform. And your platform can be a wiki to start with. It doesn't need to be like a full-blown framework. And then if you're at the stage where you've done an experiment, you sort of know it works, and you want to generalize it, use events to break out of the monolith, and start building domain services outside of your monolith. And with that comes a lot of new things you need to learn, like where are your boundaries, how to test these things, and how to monitor them. If you're there, I'm going to be here at the end of the talk. I want to speak to you because I want to learn to see how it feels to not have monoliths, or at least if you're further down the journey. But whatever you do, and this would be kind of almost, again, reflecting to myself, is be comfortable with being confused. Accept that it's stressful. It is stressful. And use observability to light that path, to know that you're not breaking systems, to know that you're making things better. And with that, thank you very much.
Questions? You can come up to the mic on either side. Feel free.
You mentioned DynamoDB. Did you have a relational database beforehand? If so, what was the time path to migrate off of your relational database to a DynamoDB? And at the same time, why DynamoDB? Why not like a serverless Postgres DB and such?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our original database was SQL Server, is SQL Server, and it's very, very relational. So the second question was around timeline.
Yeah.
So the timeline, I guess there's no strict timeline of when we're going to do this. We're leading with product needs, or how the product roadmap is. So we're not sort of taking 2 years off to do the architecture modernization. We're doing as is. And the third thing is we could use some other, like there's a spectrum of databases that you could use. I've used DynamoDB very successfully in previous companies. It's the best fit for serverless paradigm. One thing I'd say about Dynamo is that it exposes a lot of things that other databases don't, and potentially, hopefully, that leads to better data modeling. But obviously, that's why you've got loads of problems between engineers learning it. I think we will end up broadening that, but I think DynamoDB gives you that really, really quick read that you need, like when you have loads and loads of reads, and it helps with making, like, almost exposing to the developer the constraints that you need to develop systems.
So do you have both systems right now?
So yeah.
Oh, you have both SQL Server and DynamoDB?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're not. Where is it? We're not there yet.
Yeah. No problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
At a previous job, I worked with a lot of microservices, and the biggest problem we'd run into is drift with the contracts between the services. You know, you'd be really good at making sure that your front-end API knew that service A was changing, but you wouldn't realize, oh, service B also calls this API or also sends this message. How do you deal with that kind of testing the contracts between the different services and preventing that kind of thing?
That's a great question. So how do you deal with services when you've got a lot more interdependency all of a sudden? That's one of the things that we had. So one of the first problems we faced was our front-end monolith was able to end-to-end test things because it was all kind of monolith back-end and front-end. I think right now we take a bit more of a focus on observability and a focus on sort of assuming that some things are okay, because you have to take a little bit of control away from your testing. But we're looking into different patterns as we grow, and yeah, we've not done contract testing or anything like that yet, so we're really early on.
All right, now you're pretty much figuring, I'll see it if it's broken at least.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's always, I always have that tendency that I think, I'm not saying we don't test, but we also need to focus a lot on observability and monitoring, and I think you have to sort of give control away a little bit.
Makes sense. You can go too far just on testing. Thanks.
Yeah, but thanks for that.
Thanks for the presentation, definitely really cool. I'm curious if you do any sort of like cost planning about how the new system's gonna work, because I know you give more control to the teams, but then do you plan out like keeping an eye on how the costs are gonna be? Like, do you estimate like how much more things will cost and like keep track of that during your migration as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, question around cost. It's interestingly, again, not advertising Datadog here, but cloud costs in Datadog is a really, really good tool. And we're just starting to use that, and we're tagging all the costs with the teams. In terms of projection, it's hard to make that projection because you're rebuilding stuff. You're not necessarily just moving the workloads. You could take a top-level request. I've done that recently for our sort of biggest system, our like most traffic system, and then move it to Lambda, or you can do that on AWS. And that was like 3 times cheaper than what we have now. So that's I don't know if anyone has any better answers. That's the best effort I've had with that kind of projection. But it's not so straightforward, because as you're building stuff outside of your monolith, you're not lifting and shifting necessarily. You're picking out capabilities a little bit. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So you mentioned like protecting your new services from the monolith. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about like how you managed or sort of prevented circular dependencies as you build out more new services.
Yeah, good question. So you mean calling back to the
or like data dependencies between, like if they're accessing the same database.
Well, I guess one of the constraints we put is you don't access the same database. So that's one thing. There's different patterns that we used for migrating some of the data. Some of them is the seeding the data back. So if you need some data from the monolith, you store that data locally in the shape that you want it. So then from then on, you're just relying on events. In terms of circular dependencies, I think we came across that once, and then as in testing, but I don't think we've got great ways of stopping that right now. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, thanks.
My question is more of an organizational / management one. How do you keep momentum up and avoid getting stuck about 90% of the way through when all of the high-profile, easy, and fun tasks are done?
Yeah.
So you have your whole monolith left to serve all the remaining stuff, plus all the new services.
Yeah. Do you want the short answer or the long answer? So the short answer is, hopefully I can submit a talk next year at Dash and tell you how. The long answer is that we have some governance in place. So we've got a target architecture document that we all reviewed and we agreed on. We have monthly reviews of what we're doing and how we're doing things. And things are progressing. And whether we're going to complete the migration, I don't know. I'm open to less determinism, I guess. Like I'm open to, at some point, the monolith might just publish QR codes for tables, and that's all it does. And then that's fine. We can deal with that. And we've moved things out. And I think when we're not there yet, but when we get to a critical point, I think then we can say we've done enough and the monolith becomes less important. But you're right. Right now, it's still at that point where the monolith is still really important. And then I actually didn't talk about the second monolith yet. So we've still got to kind of, that's already too big and a big blast radius. But yeah, great question. Any other questions or observations? Thanks very much.